And border towns in both Mexico and the United States are dealing with a humanitarian crisis as thousands of migrants are crossing the border to get into the United States, all before Title 42 is lifted. That's that emergency policy that was put in during the pandemic that streamlined how migrants could be turned away. But with the announcement that Title 42 could be replaced by something more stringent, crowds of migrants are being told by smugglers that the time to cross is now. In Matamoros, Mexico, to Brownsville, Texas, people are using air mattresses. Some taken into custody by Border Patrol say they are running from political turmoil.
Yo tengo 3 hijos y los he dejado en El Salvador. Por eso decidí venirme. Por la necesidad, porque mi mamá, por esa circunstancia que está pasando en El Salvador, está presa por equivocación.
And for the thousands who were processed and released in the United States, many are finding U.S. cities along the border and turning to churches or even schools for shelter. But there isn't enough room for everyone. People have set up tents in Ciudad Juarez. Others are sleeping outside in El Paso. The question now is what happens when the policy changes 1 week from today? NBC News national correspondent Gabe Gutierrez has this report from Mexico.
Gadi, this is a migrant tent camp that has sprung up here in Juarez, Mexico, just across the border from El Paso. You can see there are tents here. There are hundreds, if not over 1,000 migrants just in this spot. And shelters and other migrant camps are spread across Juarez. And you can see these tents stretching all the way down there. And Gadi, across the street is that migrant detention center that caught fire in March and killed 40 people. Just another reminder of just how dangerous the humanitarian crisis can be here at the border. We've been speaking with migrants here throughout the day. They feel like they're lost in limbo at this point, and many of them have been told many different things when it comes to what will happen when they reach the U.S. border. They may not be able to talk about the specifics of Title 42, but they have heard vaguely about what it could mean. They are making decisions at this point based on information they've heard from social media, from their friends in their home countries, and from human smugglers that tell them, frankly, misinformation about what they will find once they reach the U.S. There is a sense of desperation here among many of these migrants. We were here just down the street earlier today when a pickup truck filled with food and water showed up, and they immediately scrambled to get in line to get this food and water. And we spoke with one of the volunteers that brought this humanitarian aid. Take a listen to what she had to say about why it was important for her to be here.
It's a heartbreaking thing, seeing all these people. We wish we could do more for them.
And Gadi, officials across the border in El Paso said today that they believe there are at least 10,000 migrants here in Juarez waiting to cross the U.S. border once Title 42 is lifted. And it's such a dire situation in El Paso that officials had declared a state of emergency earlier in the week, but now they're saying that they will house migrant families temporarily in vacant middle schools starting next week. Gadi.
NBC's Gabe Gutierrez, thanks so much. New legal trouble for the NFL. AGs in New York and California are teaming up as they investigate allegations of discrimination. Both AGs cite a 2022 New York Times report with more than 30 women who were employees of the NFL saying they faced gender discrimination and retaliation after filing complaints to HR. They also referenced a new discrimination lawsuit filed last month here in Los Angeles by a former female manager. The league calls these allegations inconsistent with its values and practices and insists discrimination is not tolerated. And NBC's Kathy Park is following all this for us. Kathy, walk us through these allegations, both in the Times article and the one we're seeing here in L.A.
Yeah, so we will start with that New York Times article. It was published last year, and dozens of former female employees came forward. They were on the record, and they were essentially putting a spotlight on the NFL in a toxic work environment. There were claims, various claims that range from harassment, sexism, and discrimination on several levels. And in fact, there's one incident where in 2020, during a halftime Super Bowl show, one woman claims that the senior executive, they got into an argument and he pushed her. And apparently that senior executive still held on to his job. There are other issues when women had problems within the workplace. They decided to come forward with the HR department, and they said those claims kind of went ignored. And then another thing, 2014, you might remember the Ray Rice scandal, and that video surfaced. It was a shocking footage of of him assaulting his fiancée, and the NFL came forward and said, look, we're going to make some changes. We're going to make some improvements. And a lot of these former employees are saying it fell short. They didn't do that. So the New York AG, as well as the AG in California, they will be looking at all these allegations and essentially trying to see if any sort of employment discrimination laws were broken. But you also, mentioned LA this last year. Most recently in Superior Court, there was a lawsuit that was filed by a former female manager for NFL Enterprises. She was hired in 2003, and eventually her role was elevated. And she said over time there were issues when she became, a manager kind of at the top level. She was excluded from a lot of these senior executive meetings, and eventually she was told at one point her job was no longer needed. And shortly after that, another female employee replaced her, and she was much younger. So she is suing for age and age discrimination.
And Kathy, I know that there's the NFL corporate organization, and then there's the NFL, which is the teams and the players. Are these all lumped together here, or are we just talking the corporate organization?
Yeah, so based on what was released today by the AGs, it looks like this is a probe that will be looking more on the corporate level. So teams and players have not been singled out.
Kathy Park, thanks so much.
Yeah.
And a college town in California might soon get answers on a series of deadly stabbings this past week. Police say they arrested Carlos Dominguez today. We learned he was a student at UC Davis until a week ago. Police brought him into custody without handcuffs. Now, KCRA caught the moment police led him into the squad car and took him to the station. Dominguez now faces homicide and attempted murder charges. The motive and attacks are still under investigation. The Davis community has been on edge since last week when the stabbing spree started. The first two attacks were deadly, and the last left a woman hurt. Joining us now is NBC's Aaron Gilchrist. Aaron, how did police make this arrest?
Yeah, Gadi, largely because of tips from the community there in the Davis area, the police were able to make this arrest. The surviving victim and a witness to at least one of the attacks were able to give Davis police a pretty detailed description of the attacker here. So police say that they were able to get really a cluster of phone calls, tips, more than a dozen calls on Wednesday afternoon about a person in a park matching the description that police had put out earlier. Officers went there. They found 21-year-old Carlos Dominguez. Our affiliate, as you can see in the video here, KCRA, was flying over the area as Dominguez was being questioned by some police officers there and then eventually taken into custody. Police say they also found a large knife on Dominguez at the time, and at that point they declared him a person of interest. You might imagine here, after 3 stabbings in less than a week in this small community, people were scared and, as we understand it, they were very vigilant.
I had called in a report while I was in the car just saying that there was a person matching this description walking down the street and kind of tried to keep them updated. I'm hoping that this is the person and that Davis can kind of be done with this and that we are safe again.
Now, as we understand it, the Davis Police Department says Dominguez was questioned at length through several hours. Investigators were able to pull together enough evidence and enough information that they were able to, they say, tie him to these stabbings in that community, and they were able to formally arrest him yesterday as well, or rather today, this afternoon, I should say. We understand there was blood and fiber evidence that police say they were able to pull together here, Gadi, but the investigation, as you noted, does continue.
And Aaron, I mean, so many people in that community that have been on edge are going to be watching that video and just, raising their eyebrows, seeing him taken into custody. Looks like he was just put in the car, or he might have gotten in the police car voluntarily, no handcuffs on him. Then they get to the police station. Still doesn't seem like he has handcuffs there. In terms of when he was formally charged, did that happen afterwards when he was inside the police department, or what happened there?
Yeah, so as we understand it, they took him into custody because of that knife and because of the calls they got where people said he matched the description of the suspect. So he was a person of interest initially when he, by the video it seems, agreed to get into the police cruiser there, the SUV, and then go to be questioned further. He was initially put in jail on a possession of a weapon, that knife. Initially, that was overnight. last night, early this morning. And then as detectives were able to collect more information, able to pull together some evidence as well, they came to the conclusion this afternoon, around 1 o'clock, I understand, 1 o'clock West Coast time, they were able to charge him. He's being charged in the stabbing deaths of 2 of the victims and with attempted murder in the case of the woman who survived these attacks. And, Gadi, it's worth noting here that the investigation, as we said, is ongoing. There's still not any real information about a motive in this case. The police say that they haven't been able to find anything that says that Dominguez knew any of the victims here. So still a lot of questions to be answered.
What a bizarre moment captured there by KCRA. Them searching him, then him getting in the car. Aaron Gilchrist, thanks so much for joining us. And there are calls for criminal charges tonight after a deadly confrontation in the New York City subway. A man dying after another passenger put him in a chokehold. NBC's Stephanie Gosk has more, and a warning, some of the video is disturbing.
Tonight, there is growing pressure on the Manhattan District Attorney to bring criminal charges after a man was choked to death on the subway Monday.
He could not breathe.
Jordan Neely ended up on the floor of the train in a headlock after police say an argument turned into a violent confrontation. When it was over, Neely was unconscious. EMS attempts to revive the 30-year-old failed. The medical examiner ruled his death a homicide by chokehold. So far, there are no criminal charges. The 24-year-old who held Neely in a headlock was taken into custody and then released, according to police. The video obtained by NBC New York shows Neely in a chokehold for nearly 3 minutes. The witness who took it says Neely got on the subway and was acting aggressively, telling riders he was hungry, he was thirsty, that he didn't care about anything. He didn't care about going to jail. He didn't care that he gets a big life sentence. Today, New York's governor called the chokehold a, quote, extreme response.
There had to be consequences, and so we'll see how this unfolds, but his family deserves justice.
The DA's office is asking people to come forward. The central question is whether force was justified. Were people on the train threatened? Was it self-defense? Mayor Eric Adams saying he won't rush to judgment.
And I have a responsibility for this entire city, and I have faith in the criminal justice system, and I'm going to let the process take its place.
Neely was a known street performer who was homeless, according to the NYPD. The Manhattan Borough president says the mental health system failed him. The city is battling both a mental health and homeless crisis, with numbers at shelters at their highest since the Great Depression. Those who don't go to shelters often end up on the subway.
Stephanie Gosk, thank you. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas is under scrutiny again tonight after ProPublica reported that wealthy Republican donor Harlan Crow paid thousands in school tuition for one of Justice Thomas's relatives. Now, the exact total remains unclear, but the amount could have been somewhere in the $150,000 range. And while NBC News hasn't independently verified the details in the report, Crow's office did release a statement. It said that Crow and his wife have long been passionate about giving back to those less fortunate, especially at-risk youth, through scholarships and financial assistance, which they say was given directly to academic institutions, not to students or their families. NBC's Laura Jarrett has more.
Hey, Gadi, more questions tonight about the extent of the financial entanglements between Justice Thomas and this wealthy GOP donor, Harlan Crow. In particular, questions surrounding why Thomas didn't simply just disclose the tuition payments that Crow made on his behalf for his grandnephew, who Thomas was raising as a son, especially since Thomas had actually disclosed at least one payment that we know about dating back to 2002 for $5,000 from a different friend, but still related for the education of his grandnephew. So those are some of the questions I think that are going to be likely to be percolating throughout the next coming days on all of this. But we won't have answers from Justice Thomas himself because he has not said anything about this. The court has not weighed in on any of these issues at all so far, at least. But in the past, Justice Thomas has said, look, this was one of my friends, one of my dear friends. He had no business before the court. And he's also said that he was advised that he didn't need to disclose any of the gifts from Harlan Crow. Now, as for where all of this goes in Congress next, you see a lot of Democrats coming out in force today, demanding ethics reform, demanding that the Supreme Court actually actually adopt a more formal ethics code like the one that applies to all other federal judges in the country. They actually are not bound by anything right now. The Supreme Court isn't bound by anything other than just the ability to police themselves. But without any GOP support in Congress, Gadi, Democrats are likely not to make much headway on this, and so it'll largely be up to the justices themselves to act or not. Gadi, back to you.
Laura Jarrett, thanks so much. And coming up, a woman snuck 22, count them, 22 snakes on a plane after stuffing them in her luggage. You're not going to want to miss this story. Now let's head around the world in 80 seconds. In Israel, mass protests happened nationwide today in what demonstrators are calling Disruption Day to demand equality. They're fighting against Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu's controversial plan for judicial reform, as well as Israel's rising costs of living and the military draft exemptions granted to some Orthodox Jews. Protesters blocked roads, highways, and picketed in front of the homes of politicians. Paul Whelan, the former U.S. Marine who has been detained in Russia for more than 4 years, was visited by the U.S. ambassador to Russia today. That visit happened in a remote Russian penal colony. The ambassador did not comment on Whelan's condition or elaborate on their conversation. And talk about art imitating life, and by art we mean 2005's Snakes on a Plane. Last week, a woman managed to smuggle a whopping 22 snakes and 1 chameleon onto a flight from Malaysia to India. She packed them all into one single check-in and Newt Scamander-style bag, but customs officials searched her bag and found all of her scaly friends. And in less than 2 days, we're going to see the first coronation of the United Kingdom in 70 years. Now, the world has changed a lot since Queen Elizabeth took the throne back in 1953, but King Charles's big day could have a lot in common with his mother's coronation. NBC's Keir Simmons tells us more.
In less than 48 hours, the world will witness pomp and pageantry not seen for 7 decades, the coronation of a new British monarch. The ceremony steeped in 1,000 years of history. Overnight, rehearsals in and around Westminster Abbey included King Charles and Queen Camilla, as well as William and Kate and their children, George, Charlotte and Louis. A new generation in a centuries-old setting. This was the moment Elizabeth II became queen in 1953. Her then 4-year-old, Charles, looking on, but not participating. 70 years later, the heavy St. Edward's crown will rest on her son's head. The priceless crown jewels, transported from the Tower of London, trace back to the 17th and 13th centuries.
Crowns are incredibly important symbols of monarchy. St. Edward's crown is the crown that's used for the actual moment of crowning. It's a very heavy gold crown.
In 1953, Elizabeth's husband, Philip, was first to pledge his allegiance. Charles' oldest son and heir to the throne, Prince William, will play that role for his father. While on his way to being crowned, King Charles will follow the same royal route as last year, when he walked behind the casket of his late mother. 7,000 British troops will take part, the military promising a stunning spectacle, recognisable by kings and queens past.
These guns, forming the royal salute for the King's coronation, were fired for the Queen's funeral, the arc of history.
As in previous generations, controversy will be close by. Prince Harry will attend, but without his wife Meghan or their children. 70 years ago, Queen Elizabeth's coronation was the first to be televised. Now a monarch will assume the throne in the digital era, and yet the most sacred moment will remain hidden. During the anointing with oil, the king will be shielded from the cameras by an ornate screen. His moment with God as he contemplates his new role in history.
And coming up, we're going to tell you why the man accused of shooting 5 women in Atlanta and then leading police on an 8-hour manhunt did not appear in court today as scheduled. But first, you gotta see this. Crazy surveillance video shows the heart-stopping moment after the wind blew a stroller towards a busy California road. You can see the baby's great aunt trying to run after it, but she collapses to her knees. That's when this hero, Ron Nessman, comes to the rescue, saving the stroller just in time. Nessman is taking it all in stride. He's hoping this is a sign of good things to come. Nessman is currently on the job hunt, so maybe we should consider this his resume and possibly his recommendation. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Let's get you caught up in 30 seconds. AGs of New York and California launched an investigation into discrimination at the NFL. The allegations are that the league's corporate offices are engaged in were engaged in sexual and racial harassment. Police arrested a man accused of fatally stabbing 2 people and injuring another near the campus of UC Davis, California. The 21-year-old suspect was a student at the university up until last week. And a jury today decided that Ed Sheeran is not liable for copyright infringement. He was accused of stealing parts of Marvin Gaye's Let's Get It On for his song Thinking Out Loud. In Atlanta, the suspected gunman of that horrific medical facility shooting has now been charged with 1 count of murder and 4 counts of aggravated assault, according to jail records. 24-year-old Dion Patterson was captured yesterday evening after an 8-hour-long manhunt. He's accused of shooting 5 women, killing 1, 39-year-old Amy St. Pierre, who worked at the CDC in Atlanta, and hurting 4 others. All of the victims ranging in ages from 25 to 71, and all of them are still at the hospital, with 3 of them under intensive care. At this point, the motive is still unclear. NBC News correspondent Blaine Alexander has been following all this. Blaine, what else do we know about how that apprehension took place?
Well, we know that it was really marvelous when you kind of look at just how all of these details came together, Gadi. So we're talking about, this is here in Midtown Atlanta where it happened. He was apprehended about 15 miles away north in Cobb County near the Braves Stadium. So when you consider just how sprawling the metro Atlanta area is, it really is remarkable that police were, one, able to isolate his location using technology, using license plate readers. They were able to figure out where exactly he was. And then it was a neighbor in this apartment complex who actually led police to where he is. Now, I spoke with her today. She told me that there really weren't too many officers in her direct neighborhood, but she says she went up to one and said, hey, you know what? There are a lot of hiding places near our pool. There's a gazebo, there's a pool house, a creek. Maybe you guys should go check down there. And sure enough, that's where they found him. Here's a little bit of what she told me today. Take a look.
I was like, wow. I mean, I can't believe my thought, my hunch would lead to them finding, somebody. But, why not the perfect place, to hide?
Stunning when you consider the fact that he was taken into custody without incident, Gadi.
Yeah, you got to trust your gut sometimes. What else do we know about him? Why was he at that medical facility?
Well, we know that he was there for a medical appointment. He was there with his mother. There are certainly a lot of things that we're learning about this. His mother spoke to the Associated Press today and said that her son was dealing with anxiety and depression and that he was trying to seek medication for that. But she said that she was concerned because he had previously been turned down for medication that he was seeking for that. Now, there's certainly a lot of questions about what exactly transpired, what happened leading up in to the days here, and how he was able to have possession and be in possession of a handgun, Gadi.
And how about the victims? How are they doing tonight?
They've got a long road ahead of them. That's something really that has been impressed upon us from the moment that we started hearing from Grady Memorial Hospital here in Atlanta. We're talking about 4 other people who survived this attack, but 2 right now are still in critical condition. We're learning more about those wounds. 2 of the women were shot in the abdomen, another in the arm, and a 4th victim, Gadi, was shot in the face. So I think a lot of times we hear, people who survived this, but really the medical experts there say they've got a long road ahead, and these wounds could stay with them for quite some time to come.
Blaine Alexander, thanks so much. And a rough day on Wall Street, one day after the Federal Reserve raised interest rates again, and more banks continue to teeter. With a 0.25 percentage point increase, the benchmark rate is now about 5% up from near zero in March of 2022. Today, Moody's chief economist told Congress that it has created tremendous pressure on the economy.
The banking crisis will continue on. The availability of credit, the cost of credit will become prohibitive. I think it's going to be very difficult for small businesses to not only operate and thrive, but to actually survive.
And Los Angeles-based PacWest is the latest to suffer from shell shock following the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank in March, and others have followed right after. Shares tumbled more than 50% today. The bank is considered all options, including a sale. Now, earlier this week, First Republic Bank was seized by regulators and sold to J.P. Morgan Chase. Both of those banks are based here in California, but this is happening all across the country. Regional banks in Phoenix, Dallas, Salt Lake City, Cleveland, and Memphis are all down with massive losses today. Investopedia's Caleb Silver is here with us to help break it all down. Caleb, banking is all about trust, and that seems to be severely lacking right now. How do you explain what's going on?
Yeah, banking is also supposed to be boring, but it's anything but boring right now. And what we're talking about here, Gadi, is contagion. A lot of these banks are actually okay, but it's the fear that investors have that their balance sheets just aren't right. Given that steep rise in interest rates over the last 14 months, that's really put a lot of pressure on these banks, and a lot of customers have taken their deposits elsewhere, a lot of them to bigger banks. But if you look inside a lot of these banks, they're actually okay. It's just the fear factor gripping investors saying, I don't know if I trust this bank is going to be able to continue. You mentioned PacWest. That bank's been around since 1999. It was doing just fine. It did lose some deposits, about $5 billion in the last quarter, but nothing crazy. That said, investors did not like what they saw under the surface, and they started to sell off there, and it spread to all these other banks, and that's what's been going on for the past month. But inside these banks, they're pretty much okay, except these rising interest rates have put a lot of them under pressure.
And Caleb, we saw J.P. Morgan Chase take over First Republic. Are we entering an era where the biggest banks start picking off these regional ones?
Yeah, the big are getting bigger here because a lot of that deposit flow coming out of these smaller regional banks have gone to the bigger banks. They have a lot of assets and a lot of deposits, but they also have a lot of cash reserves to back up those deposits, and they can handle a recession potentially. They can handle a liquidity crisis potentially, and that's what we might be facing. The problem with people pulling their money out of these regional banks and them getting taken over or taken under is that there's not going to be a lot of bank lending either between banks or to customers or small businesses. These regional banks, very important in the local communities where they operate. So it's not great to see them going under and the big banks taking over. Not healthy for those economies, not healthy for those customers as well.
Now, Caleb, there's something I've been wanting to ask you. It might be nothing, but meanwhile, on my phone, of all places, there seems to be this new era banking battle that's been playing out. All of a sudden, you've got Robinhood going to offer a savings account with like a 4.65% interest rate. Apple has a savings account promising 4.15. Is all of that related? It feels like this might be fintech trying to disrupt banking right in the middle of this looming crisis.
Yeah, everybody wants your money, Gadi, including these players. But remember, Apple is not a bank. Goldman Sachs is the bank behind Apple's savings account. Robinhood is going to offer that savings account to only its gold members who pay $5 a month for the privilege, and they're going to take your sweeps, the money you don't have invested in your account, and sweep them into the savings account that's offering something like 4.65%. These are not banks, though. These are software platforms and online brokers, and Apple, of course, is a big platform and software maker. They're partnering with other banks, but everybody wants your money, especially the money you don't have invested. Robinhood needs people to invest, and nobody's doing a lot of that right now, so they're moving over to banking.
A lot of money moving right now. We'll see where it lands. Caleb Silver, thanks so much. And still to come, the White House is hosting some of the biggest names in AI, but will it have an impact on an escalating AI arms race? Plus, hackers unleashing an attack on Dallas wreaks havoc on the city, shutting down courts and hitting 911 services. We're going to tell you what happened coming up next. And here's some of the other headlines we're watching tonight. 4 Proud Boys were found guilty of seditious conspiracy today for the January 6th insurrection. One of the men charged took this video on the day of the attack, and it was presented in court.
So we just stormed the Capitol, took the place back. That was so much fun. So much America. So much America. No more murders. January 6th will be a day in infamy.
Sentencing is next. E. Jean Carroll has rested her case against former President Donald Trump. She is suing him for battery and defamation in relation to an alleged rape in the 1990s. Today, her lawyers showed the jury a video of Trump confusing Carroll with his ex-wife. Now, the prosecution is saying this is a big deal because Trump has repeatedly said Carroll is not his type. A New York judge has dismissed the former president's lawsuit against the New York Times. Trump claimed that the Times and 3 of its journalists went against constitutional law in a story about his finances. The judge said their actions were protected by the First Amendment and were ordinary for journalists. In Dallas, officials are scrambling to get a ransomware attack under control. It is affecting the city's police department and the city hall's website, and it is still down. Now, the attack forced some trials to be canceled and even affected Dallas's emergency 911 dispatch system. And lawmakers in North Carolina passed a new abortion bill today that bans the procedure after 12 weeks of pregnancy in nearly all situations. Until now, abortions were banned only after 20 weeks of pregnancy. The state's Democratic governor says he will veto the bill, calling it egregious, but lawmakers say they will override that veto. And as you might have seen, we talk about AI pretty much every single night on this show. As long as us humans are still in control, we'll continue to do that. But it's become a big topic at the White House as well. Earlier today, Vice President Kamala Harris met with the CEOs of 4 major companies in the AI space, and President Biden stopped by as well.
What you're doing has an enormous potential and enormous danger.
Now, the White House is pushing companies to limit the risks of AI and stress that they have a moral obligation to keep products safe. NBC's Tom Costello has more.
It's technology that experts say will profoundly change our world. Artificial intelligence could soon supersede our own human intelligence, pulling from thousands of years of human innovation, knowledge, problem solving, and global databases. Dr. Jeffrey Hinton, who helped pioneer AI, recently left Google to warn AI is growing too fast.
Do you believe that artificial intelligence, as it grows at this pace, poses an existential threat to humans?
Yes, I think it's possible.
AI is already reinventing science, medicine, and music.
But also producing fake news, photos, and videos, potentially undermining democracies, even replacing humans in critical jobs.
At the White House today, 4 top tech CEOs meeting with the vice president about AI's promise and peril.
It's definitely going to be a challenge, but it's one I'm sure we can handle.
Not anticipating photos of today's summit, we told AI to create an image of the meeting. Underscoring the threat, this is what it created. This is not a real photo. It was created by an AI program with the names of people attending, including President Biden.
What you're doing has an enormous potential and enormous danger.
Late today, real video from the White House.
Our job is to make sure that we do seize the benefits, and we have to start by mitigating the risks.
I think it's possible that people are just passing phase in the evolution of intelligence.
People are a passing phase. In other words, computers will take over.
Yes, that's possible.
The concern, AI may be spreading too fast to contain. Tom Costello, NBC News, Washington.
And as for the open source decentralized AI projects happening all over the world now, that is the next hurdle on the horizon that is looking more and more insurmountable by the day. Thanks, Tom Costello. Meanwhile, as people question whether AI-powered social media algorithms are contributing to a teen mental health crisis, doctors at Cincinnati Children's Hospital are trying to use AI for good. They are building a mental health detection system that identifies risks and missed signals earlier in childhood. And we do want to warn you that this discusses suicide. NBC's Jake Ward has more.
The amazing thing about artificial intelligence is that it's able to pick out patterns in very, very noisy data that we might not otherwise be able to see inside ourselves. That could be financial data, it could be traffic patterns. Well, it turns out that if you feed it enough data from medical records, it may in fact be able to get out in front of distressing mental health issues in young people.
20-year-old Joe Whelan was smart, kind, and funny.
Come on, boys. Keep up.
But his parents say he struggled. First, with an eating disorder that started when he was just 12 years old.
We had no context of where that might be coming from.
A search for answers finally revealed that Joe had been sexually abused by a trusted family member. He battled complex PTSD for years, which led to inpatient care and partial hospitalization. And then COVID hit, resulting in a lack of beds at his treatment center.
That was as long as he could hang on.
Joe died by suicide in September 2020. A 2021 CDC survey found nearly 1 in 4 American high schoolers had seriously considered taking their own lives. But with a national shortage of therapists, experts at Cincinnati Children's Hospital are now using AI to identify the risk of anxiety, depression, and suicide early in kids, using signs even the most well-intentioned parent or expert might miss.
Our goal is to move upstream and reduce the flow of behavioral and mental health illnesses.
Doctors Tracy Klauser and John Pestian built the model themselves. They trained the AI to spot patterns not just using structured data, height, weight, the stuff you record during a doctor's visit, but also unstructured data, like the language used in conversation and even in the messages left behind by people who've attempted suicide.
You have a library of suicide notes. Yes. Wow.
They found that the AI was able to pull signs from even the most subtle patterns in language, like how often someone uses nouns rather than pronouns.
Those that aren't suicidal will use the word I more often than those who are suicidal, and they don't refer to themselves that often.
Wow. So if in the language of the suicide note they refer to things other than themselves more often, they're more likely to commit suicide.
They showed us other examples. This one, a patient who was diagnosed with anxiety during an April 2020 visit. Additional data, like language and speech, revealed that that patient already had a high risk for anxiety 8 months before, something a doctor might otherwise miss. Cincinnati Children's wants to make the AI tool available for pediatricians, teachers, parents, anyone who can make appropriate use of missed signals.
Is this going to make the shortage of human therapists worse?
It does not make diagnoses. It does not provide therapy. But what it does is it helps focus people on who's the one who needs the help right now.
The Whelans built this bench to remember Joe. They say they would have turned to anyone or anything, including AI, for help.
I don't think there's an AI solution that's going to solve this problem. I think you're going to need people to people, but we are incredibly short on those people right now.
Now, when I asked the physicians behind this system whether this, stands a threat of somehow replacing therapists, they say no. This is basically a tool that therapists can use. And the reason that they're so determined to create it is because of the incredible shortage of therapists. In the United States right now, the Department of Health and Human Services estimates that we are going to be short at least 10,000 therapists by the year 2025. That's a lack of training, that's a lack of available people. And so it may be that a system like this, as long as we continue to also invest in the training of human therapists, could make them that much more effective. Back to you.
Jake Ward, thank you. And if you or a loved one are suffering, you can call 988 for help. Now time for a temperature check. Trees are moving up north. Yeah, you heard me right. Trees across America are moving north as the climate changes. This map right here, it basically shows where plants can thrive in the United States based on the environment. And this is what the plant temperature zones look like right now. Take a look at the southern zone there. And this is what it's expected to look like in about 50 years as temperatures continue to rise. You can see the brown there making huge leaps upward, fully taking over the South. And here to explain that is Dan Lamb. He is the CEO of the Arbor Day Foundation. Dan, thanks so much for joining us. I mean, how exactly are these trees moving up north? A lot of people are just going to think about what they've seen in the movies, but we're talking about something that is taking place over decades and something that we're starting to see in the science, right?
Right. Well, these hardiness zone maps that the United States Department of Agriculture puts together to help guide people who are planting trees and plants based on where they live, what's the best plants to put in their ground. And at the Arbor Day Foundation, we're all about making sure people are planting the right tree in the right place. And so as weather's changing, as it's getting hotter and hotter, and we're seeing a slow progression of trees to the north, as you're pointing out. And it's all about planting the right tree in the right place. And that's what this information is about, is helping tree planters have success.
And I feel like a lot of people are going to be listening to this thinking, okay, well, maybe we'll plant some different tree in front of our home. But just because a tree can survive in a different location, does it mean that it's safe to be grown there?
It's a great question. Just because you live in Detroit and love palm trees, don't start planting palm trees. You still want to make sure you're planting the right tree in your community. And this hardiness zone map, this future hardiness zone map, is a tool. It's a guide. We want to make sure people are planting the right trees for the ecosystems and biodiversity based on where they live. And so continuing to plant some native trees, continuing to plant the trees that thrive in your neighborhood are good. But what this research tells us is we might have a bigger palette of trees to choose from as we deal with our changing climate.
And what's at stake here?
Well, what this really says is that climate change is not just this obscure notion that is talked about on the media. It's in our front yards and our backyards. And trees have never been more important than they are today. And so if people are going to invest the time, invest the money in planting trees, we want to make sure they're successful and that those trees flourish for years and years to come, because they're such an important tool to help mitigate the impacts of a changing climate. And so that's why this tool is out there, and we're excited to help tree planters make sure they're having success.
Dan, thanks so much for joining us.
You bet.
And May is Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and all month long we will be amplifying AAPI voices. And first, you can now buy your very own anime Wong Barbie. The company announced the release of their Barbie in honor of AAPI Month. It is dressed in red and with a shiny golden dragon designer cape, and inspired by her appearance in the 1934 movie Limehouse Blues. That does it for us tonight. I'm Gadi Schwartz. We'll see you tomorrow. But until then, stay tuned now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.